Hey guys, it's Matt, welcome to SpeedTutor. So in this video I'm going to touch on all the best ways to make your audio sound better and ways to implement this in Unity, whether that's with tips, tricks, assets, or free stuff that you can find online. I'm going to try and show you it all, so comment down below if you've got any tips and tricks for making audio sound better in whichever way you've ever done, and I will put annotations in the timeline so you can skip onto parts which are relevant to you. And do be sure, if you like this video, to leave a like and subscribe because it helps me out massively. And do be sure to check out my Patreon too to get over 225 different scripts, assets and projects you cannot find anywhere else. Do be aware that I did create a tutorial all about understanding the basics of audio within Unity, whether that's audio sources between 2D and 3D, or how you need to control those, understanding audio mixes, and understanding every single part of the basics of Unity Audio, and I'll leave the link down below. It does take some practice to build immersion, think about everything in the real world, and then integrate this into your own game. As with anywhere you go in the world, whether you're out on the street, whether you're sat in your home, whether you're listening out of the window, listen to all the sounds that you hear. Think of all these layers that you can add to a scene to build up a picture and a story of exactly what's going on in this situation. And this storytelling can help you build up the atmosphere and actually create an emotional tension for the player, because that can then allude to excitement, tension. Because I've got an example here, as you can see, is just a cabin in the forest with looking like some wind blowing against the trees, but there's no sound. It doesn't feel quite right. Now we take that example and we add some wind, add trees blowing. Take that example of adding trees and winds and some birds. Before you know it, we build up a picture which looks like it could be a real scene, a stormy situation, a bleak scenario. So before we get into the meat of it, I wanted to show you some places where you can get free sound effects and even bunches of sound effects that are the best places to find them. So you can navigate to freesound.org and various websites similar to this, and you can search for sound effects and various sound effects that are royalty free, and it's got thousands upon thousands on here. You can also navigate to Humble Bundle, where you can usually find lots of different sound packs among many other things. If you do a filter by bundles and go to software, this one is available right now. I'll put all the links to the description if any others are available, and it's a big sound collection with 3,000 audio effects, songs and other stuff that you can use in your game. So it's a great way to get bundles of audio that might be really useful across loads of projects. You can get hundreds of gigabytes of audio for free from the GDC Sonis audio bundles, and this is the one for 2024, and you can download this from their official torrent, and they even have previous years where they've done it for 2015 up to 2023, and you can just find their links and download all those packs. I do have a full video on that, so you can check that out if you want to know. A great place is the Unity Asset Store, and one that I always recommend is the Universal Sound FX bundle, which is usually on offer, but you can get it for around $40, and it comes with over 70,000 sound effects, and often does get updated every single year with brand new sound effects that you can use. If you're wanting to look for free audio on the Unity Asset Store as well, you could navigate to the Asset Store, choose audio, and then if you want to shop all, make sure that we're filtered by audio. The price we can put on for free, and you can filter by music, sound effects or ambience, and you can find hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of sound effect packs that you can use in your games for pretty much almost anything at this point, because it's got over 800 different audio packages that could be great for you. Of course, if you didn't want to filter by free, you can untick the free and you can find lots and lots of audio packs on here. So I'll put all the links below so you don't miss out on any of these. Now on to my second point, but what I'm going to talk about is high quality audio and the benefits of that. Now it's not something I can demonstrate easy because it's not as easy to hear. Now if you look at any audio that you've got that you might have downloaded, it will have a bitrate, and the more low quality that, or the lesser that is, the more grainy, distorted or noticeable that will be, especially if you're trying to work with immersion. And anything below 64 kilobytes is considered low quality. Anything 320 kilobytes or above is better, and you've got to remember that WAV will be the best uncompressed quality, whereas MP3 is much more compressed. I will just make a note of what audio file formats are supported in Unity: AIFF, WAV, MP3, and OGG. And you've got to remember that based on Unity's own documentation, depending if you're focusing on PC and console, or whether you're developing for mobile, if you import any particular file format into Unity and you export the game to mobile, it will convert these to MP3 to save as much space as possible. Do remember, if you build out PC or console, all your sound effects will be converted to .ogg, which is a slightly more compressed format than WAV. I always recommend to use WAV where possible, and it will be compressed when you do build out your game. I've got a program here that's free and it's called Explorer, and it takes every single sound audio file that I've got on my PC and puts it into one program so I can easily search, rather than using Windows search would take me forever. And it actually characterizes it really nice, and I'll put the link in the description. I do actually have a video on using it. Now here you see I've got an audio track at the top, which is something about analog TV noise. And you can see it's the highest sample rate, which is not exactly the bit rate, but to check this in Windows Explorer, you can right click it, show in Explorer, or you can find this in Windows Explorer. You can right click that, go to properties, and if you go to details, you can see the bit rate of that is 4,600 kilobytes per second, so it's extremely high quality. Whereas if I adjust that and I go to sample rate and I just find a one here that called Confused Robot, and I'm going to open this one up and just check this out, and you can see that I look at properties, and you can see this is actually an MP3 file, and if we go to details, it's only 56 kilobytes in audio quality. So I wouldn't recommend this quality unless you've got no choice, especially if you've got mainstay audio, because it may well lose quality and you lose immersion thereafter. But the higher you go, the better the quality it's going to be. And of course, the file size will become bigger, so keep that in mind. So the next part that I thought I might want to touch on, and skip on from this if it's something not relevant to you, but it's about adding background audios and layering audio for depth. Kind of like what I mentioned earlier in this video, but it's some ways that we can layer up sound effects in Unity. Now if we test our scene, it's pretty bleak. We don't have any sound effects or anything, and it's just not very immersive at all. So I like to usually add myself a folder. In the hierarchy, I'll right click and create empty. With that being said, I like to then create my sound effects, which are going to exist as ambient sounds, which are going to make it sound cooler, and we can do lots of different things with those. So I usually like to right click, choose audio, and then an audio source. And I'm sure somebody's going to have a problem with how I say audio source, because to me, I can't say it any other way. Anyway, I'll usually rename this and give it a prefix of sound effects, and then I'll just call this ambient bird song. Then best way to do it is to bring in your own sound effects. You can right click in a folder, import new asset, and then I've got my sound library folder where you can bring in whichever sound effects are suitable for you wherever you've got them from. And then I'll go back to it and add it to my audio clip slot. I leave it on play on awake and loop, and you might want to test this out and turn the volume down slightly. So you'll be able to hear the bird song in the background there. So that's one sound effect that we've got currently. You can then adjust that if you want that to be 2D or 3D, but I like to leave this as a 2D sound that we'll hear from everywhere unless we specify otherwise. I like to duplicate it, and the current bird song did have a little bit of wind, but I want more. So I've got one that's called a wind loop, and again, this can use play on awake loop, a 2D sound, and turn the volume down slightly. And remember, it's good to get loopable sounds, and they need to be WAV to make that happen. So now you hear a combination of the constant wind that happens and the bird song that happens too. And then what I also like to add, you could add this as a 2D sound, but I like this to be a 3D sound. Now I've got a crow 3D sound, and I've just set the spatial blend to 3D, and I've set this as a linear roll-off between 44 and 80. And you can see that the roll-off encapsulates this bridge that I'm going to walk over. So only when we get closer and in that boundary do we end up hearing it. So you see, we'll end up walking up to it and only start hearing that sound effect when we're there. But it adds to that immersion because we already had some crows or birds over there that were looping around it as they're flying around this scene. I did actually add an additional sound effect for a flag sound when you get near it with a much smaller 3D area. Then I even enabled some custom sound effects that went onto the bridge, which has been put together, which sounds creaking, cracking. bridge sounds that are really strong wind that you would expect if we were on the top over here. And before you know it, with a few sound effects bunched together, we can make a really cool bit of ambience and make it really useful. So I'm going to talk about mixing audio, or taking groups of audio effects and actually mastering these yourself and putting them into one audio clip to make something that may not have a sound originally. Like it could be a monster, in my case, a monster eating some meat in a cubicle. You might not be able to get that sound, so you have to fabricate it by finding little audio clips which are going to work together to make it sound like something believable. And I'll show you a couple of examples right here. Now in this bathroom stall in my previous game, there was a sound effect here of almost like an animal that was eating in this little cubicle. So I want you to quickly listen to this little bit of audio that was created. So you got the idea, and throughout this you heard a noise at the beginning, almost like a ship horn. You heard some crunching, some meat sounds. You heard some banging, and it was all to simulate the idea of this thing was eating something in the cubicle and banging around. So the first part, it was just a long drone, which you can often get from drone packs. The next part of it was a little dog, actually, that was just eating some of its food. And that was sounded like a creature. Then the squelching sounds were just somebody playing around with some meat, which made it sound squelchy. And then other bangs that are added throughout this audio, where you could see the peaks and troughs in it. So sometimes you don't exactly know which audios are going to be for what sound. You have to kind of make it up and have a trial and error and decide, yeah, this thing could work here. Then I wanted to give you an example towards the end of my game when a secret door opens, that I wanted the sound of some sort of cement blocks to be able to move when the secret door opens. So if you listen to it here, I got a combination of little falling rocks and falling stones. I also got the sound of bricks being slid across the floor, and then with a bang, with some extra echo. So you've got to simulate the idea of what that sound could be. And I wanted to touch on making sure that every interaction in your game has a sound, whether that's clicking on UIs, whether that's picking things up, whether that's interacting with objects, whether that's even interacting with something that wouldn't normally have a sound. Let's say you pick up a pen off your desk or a battery. Would it really have a sound, you picking that up yourself? It doesn't really matter. You're meant to exaggerate it so the player can understand that the interaction has happened. So always keep that in mind. And I'll give you some examples in my adventure puzzle kit right here. So as normal, I've got footsteps for moving around. If I look at any of the objects and I press to say pick them up, you expect to have an interaction sound for them picking up in any single case. You can have different interactions for, say, you're interacting with different particular items, like you could have a metal sound or a knife sound that you should be able to hear in there. Even things that you can imagine which are small sounds for picking up this jerry can. And being able to use stuff in all different ambient objects. So this was just a few examples to keep this in your mind, that everything often needs a sound to make it believable for the player and keep that immersion going. And I want to show you a bunch of different audio filters and things that you can use that are built into Unity to make your audio sources sound like they're radios, they're in the background, they're distant, or you can add echo and distortion to things. People don't often know that they even exist. And the radio is going to act as the source which we imagine the audio to come from. Most of these will have an audio source on them which will control a 3D sound. So throughout this tutorial, I will go quiet just so that you can listen to how it will sound in different areas. So when you're on your 3D sound, you can add a component and choose a high pass filter. And this is the first one. And this actually cuts off frequencies when they get too high or too low. So this can actually make it sound more like coming from a radio if we cut down. So this is 5,000, so it cuts it down a lot. Now, if we change this to 1,000 and we listen to our audio again, I'll turn it on and off so you can get an idea of what this sounds like. So you could hear that when it was on and off, and it really reduces the frequency of the audio, and you can actually increase this value to make it even less. So if I increase this all the way up to, say, 8,000, and I make sure I play this audio again, you can hear that it's really reduced the frequency of the audio. And then the other version is a low pass filter, so you can add a new one, which is called an audio low pass filter. And this can make it sound like we're actually listening for something in another room. If you imagine a party happened in a wall behind you and the sound is incredibly muffled, this is set to the cutoff at 5,000. Now we can take a listen. So the smaller you get the value here, the more muffled that sound will be. Now we've got something called an echo filter, which you can add a component. Just type in audio echo filter, and this will have a delay on everything we say. So I'll swap up the audio, and I'll just put this police radio on here, which will just be different. And you can select the delay decay, the dry mix, and the wet mix on this. So I think you get the picture. So you can adjust if the audio has some echo, if you've got a really echoey environment. Then we have something called a distortion filter. So we can set the distortion at halfway, about 0.5. And then we've got another filter called the chorus filter, which you can also add by adding audio chorus filter. And this one, using the wet mixes of the different varieties, and can set a delay too, make it sound like something will be sung in a chorus. So if you were listening through headphones, it often sounds like your left ear and your right ear is having the audio between each other. It sort of sways between the two. So I'll just set the mix 1 to 0.5, the mix 2 to 3, and maybe if you're wearing headphones, you could hear what this sounds like, because it's hard to hear it. Because if you could hear that, it sounds like it's moving between both of my ears when that chorus filter is enabled. I've got another one called a reverb filter, and this allows us to specifically affect the way that the sound interacts with the world. So if this can be set on a specific audio effect with the audio reverb filter, and you can set a preset based on what type of environment this should be. Let's say we had an arena, and this sound wanted to sound like it was in the arena now. Now, as you could hear, I was swapping between some different effects that you could use, and it's got a whole bunch, whether you need dizzy, underwater, and a specific area. And of course, you can set your own user-specific profile if you need to affect any of these levels. So you can set how much reflection it should have in the room, reverb, diffusion, how much density, and what sort of effect you're looking for. And these presets are really good. Now, you might have seen reverb zones before. So reverb zone work like an area where any audio effect within this area will have that same effect applied. So let's say we were in a hallway. Every single one of these sounds will be affected. There's no other effects going on at the moment, apart from I will play that music and I'll play that at half volume, and you'll be able to hear my footsteps too, which will be affected by the reverb zone. So in this, you can actually set the min and max distance and use the settings exactly like you could on the reverb filter to actually create that idea of a particular area. I've got a little scene set up here, so I'm going to show you how you can use some of these effects together to make these work. Now, currently I've got a reverb zone, which is pretty much the entirety of this area. And I've just got it on generic. You can change this to a different thing. Say you wanted, let's say, a hallway for this area. I've got an audio effect, which is behind this wall, which is also a 3D effect, but it's got the low pass filter. So it makes it sound like this could be a party or a set of music going on behind this wall, which is muffled by the sound. In this room, I've got a radio, which is going to act as my police radio, and it's got the high pass filter on at about 2000 to make it sound like a more concentrated sound at this object. Then I've got a dripping sound of a tap, and this is going to be taken into account by the reverb zone, and it's just to layer up the sounds that we have in our scene. And of course, because we've got a reverb zone, the footsteps will be affected by it, the radio will be affected by it, the dripping, and anything else within its boundary. Now, this muffled sound effect, which is the sound of the party, I didn't really want to be taken into account by the reverb zone, so you can make sure that you can set the reverb zone mix down to 0, so it doesn't have any contribution. So I'm going to talk about optimization of your audio clips and looping at the same time, because it's a good way to trim them down and loop them so they're not as noticeable in game. And sometimes when you're using some audio, you may actually want it to loop more naturally, and you may need to edit this yourself. And if you do have any suggestions on how to do this more easily, do comment down below. So you can see this looped audio, which is just a track of some bird song in the background. But you could use something like Audacity, which is free, and you can press Shift and Space to actually play looped, and you can hear this when you loop it. So when you want to loop a piece of audio, or when I've done it before, is that you don't want to pick any point which has any particular high peaks. You can't see this massively because this is quite a quiet track, and I've turned this up a little bit, so it does have background noise, which it wouldn't normally. But you can see these little peaks in the audio are the little tweets from the birds, if you can hear that roughly in the background. A lot of the time, if you've got a long audio track, there's no point it being so long if you're looping it, and you want to save memory and you want to save space on disk. So it's good to just take a portion out of it, so you can loop from there. In Audition, it's usually on looped playback, so as soon as you get to the end, it will skip to the beginning. So you want to actually keep playing it until when this repeats, it doesn't have a massive interruption in how it sounds. And usually I like to do this, and you might have to sort of cut a bit out, undo it, and keep trying it. And I always suggest close your eyes and listen to when it will loop, and then you can get a sense of if you really noticed, especially if it's a background sound, if you really noticed that it actually did loop itself. Now, after I cut a piece at the beginning off and a bit at the end, if you can hear this okay, this is just the background noise really without any tweeting really. You can listen. And when it looped, it was barely noticeable. And then you want to save that out as a WAV, and it's only about a 40-second loop, and you probably wouldn't notice much different to a track that was 2 minutes long. So I wanted to go through my little house scene here. Be very mindful of the volume of audio effects that you have when you're walking around, because some can overpower others. So as you can see in this list here, I've got footsteps, which my player has. We've got background audio. I've got some bird song outside of the windows, a ceiling fan, and a radio that plays, because we'll use that slightly later in the video. Now, you may just about hear the items in the background, and you have to then end up testing things yourself to make sure that they fit for purpose in the scene that you've got, whether you stand by places where you might have 3D audio, or just be able to stand around and decide, does this overpower, especially if you've got repetitive audio like footsteps. Footsteps gets very repetitive, and you may need to adjust the volume of all audio sources whenever you use them. And then a great tip when you're in the Unity editor and you want to just test out sound effects and how they would sound in the scene view, if you right click with your mouse, you can just look around the scene from this set point. Now, if you use WASD, you can move like a ghost camera, then you use E and Q to move up and down so you can position yourself exactly where you want. Now, in the scene view, you can see there's loads of icons at the top. If you click on the audio one, which is toggle audio on and off, you click that, then you can actually hear audio that's in the scene. So if you go over to any of your audio sources, whether it's, to hear the background, whether it's to hear the fan or hear other parts, you can hear this as you move around, so you never need to enter game mode every single time you're moving around. I'm going to show you little things to improve the immersion here too. So the first thing I'm going to talk about is randomizing audio. And this is important on things like footsteps or repetitive sounds that you might get. So when we're in Unity, I've just got some footsteps here that are played on an audio source. And if I go to my player, this is a script which I created before, which takes different sound effects or an array of sound effects and varies them. So here you can see that I play footstep sounds every time I do a footstep length, and I'm just choosing between a random range. It finds a random number or the index of the array, and then chooses from 0 to the length of the array -1, and then plays a particular audio as long as it isn't the last one that we just played. You can copy this if you want this to be more relevant to you, if you don't want to play a sound effect twice, but if you just want a simple way to make this happen, I'm just going to delete out of here. I've got a footstep source, which is irrelevant to the audio source that we have, and then an audio clip array, which will be the footstep sounds. Now if we go back into here, then we can say that if footstep sounds dot length is greater than 0, we can say that the footstep source, which is the audio source that we want to do, dot clip, then we can say that it equals the footstep sounds. Then open up our square bracket, we'll have random.range, then open up a normal bracket, put 0 because we'll start at the 0 or the first one, then we'll say footsteps sounds dot length, close that bracket up and close the square bracket and a semicolon. Then we'll say our footsteps source dot play. So we make sure that we find a footstep we want to in the array between 0 and whatever the length is, and then once we've added that clip to the audio source that we want to use, we'll just play that. So you need to make sure that you actually have an audio source attached to the source slot and whichever footsteps that you want to add. And then when you try it, you get a variation on the footsteps throughout your scene. Next, what I'm going to do is show you how to randomize the pitch of audio to make it sound like you're almost using a different sound effect, but you've only got one. So all I've got here is I've got a button in the middle of my screen, and all this does is play the sound effect of my audio click once I press the button. As you can see, it there sounds the same every single time. Now in the previous one, we used random range to choose between the audio clips in the array. Now in this instance, we're going to just reference the clip audio source again, say dot pitch this time equal to random.range, and then open the brackets, and we're going to specify a value. And up here we can write two variables, which are going to be the min and the maximum pitch, and you need to decide on how much you want to skew the pitch between what you have. So we can go back down here to the random.range, and then we can say that we want to choose a value between the min and the maximum pitch, and then make sure we end that. And then what we can do is hit play every time that we do that. So now when we're in our scene again and we're pressing the button, you can see that it varies the pitch ever slightly, just so that you get a different variation of the sound each time, so you're not always hearing the same thing. And this is just a simple example, but this could be used with enemies that spawn, attacks, or enemy sounds that when they die. Just an example of this working. Now I wanted to give you an example all about audio ducking. And audio ducking is when you decrease the volume of something, an audio, if you want another piece of audio to be more prominent, like if you're watching a cutscene, or maybe you're listening to a character speak and you've got background audio, but you don't want that to be the focal point, you want the speech to be the focal. So I've got a radio here that when I walk into the trigger area, we're going to turn the background audio down so we can actually make sure this is relevant. And with my radio audio, it's a 3D sound, and I do actually use the high pass filter to make it sound like more of an intimate sound toward the radio. So you can hear my background audio that sounds quite loud just for this example. And then when we walk into here, I'm going to activate the radio. And then the background audio faded over a period of time, which you can specify. And then we can hear the radio audio. And then when this audio does finish, or whenever you choose to make it finish, we can then make sure that the background audio scales back up and goes to its original volume, and I'll show you all about that now. So, as I said, there's a collider here which acts as the trigger to activate my radio. And this trigger is just got a box collider and set to is trigger. Now I have a script called radio activate, and all this does is it finds on trigger enter the player, and then we start playing the audio source, and then I actually make sure that I disable this trigger as well. But then the special thing that it does, it starts a coroutine in the ducking audio script that I've got, which is just my reference to my script that I've already created, start coroutine, and then I make sure I call the public method from that script too to start the coroutine. Now I'll show you this script. Now this can be done in different ways. I'm not saying this is the perfect example, but it's just one example that this can be used for you. So in my ducking audio, or where we're going to reduce the volume, I've got a reference to both of the audio sources that I want to use, the background music and the radio audio. I've got a duck volume of what I want the volume to reduce to when we fade it out, and then a time that's going to take to fade it. Then we start a enumerator, which is our coroutine, and then you can see I've called it duck audio. You need to make sure you use system.collections to make this happen. Best thing to do is have a local variable to find the original volume of your background music, so when you set it back, it will go back to its original value. So for fading out, I've just got a for loop, t starts at 0, and when it's less than the fade time, we're just going to add up by time.delta time, and we're just going to make sure that that happens over that 0.5 seconds. When we're going to do the background music.volume, which is just a reference to the audio source, and do mathf.lerp, which lerps between two values, so the original value to the lower value over the period of the fade time. And then once that's done, we can be finished. Then we will be checking the coroutine for the while loop to say if the radio audio is playing, and that's built into the audio source too. So once that's done, we'll move on to the fade in, which is just like what we did here. So we do it over a period of 0.5 seconds, like we said, but instead of lerping from the original to the faded, we go from the faded to the original over the time. And then once that's done, we've finished our coroutine. And you can see I've just got a game object, which is my ducking audio script, which references both. You can see that my volume, I want it to reduce the audio source to 0.004, because that's what I found that's quite good for my background audio, and then set that over 0.5 seconds. And you can see my background audio starts at 0.02 in volume, because this will differ between what volume you've got. So then, as I showed, it will fade when we go near it.
Yeah, they have this new process. We're going to take a call now.
And you could hear in that end transition, we faded back in to the loud music. And with this code being used, you could use this for other things, like just fading in and out at the beginning of your scenes, something like that. So you can just use this fade out or this fade in logic. You could create yourself your own methods for each one, call it fade in, and then another coroutine for fade out, and you can call this anytime you want. Or you could even use this for an adaptive kind of soundtrack. So say in a lot of games where combat would happen, you can fade out your background audio and fade in the enemy action soundtrack, and you don't even need the while playing anymore. It could be until all the enemies are defeated, then you can fade back in your tranquil background music when you're exploring. So it's just a great way to use this, just to subtly do it for the player, so it's not just an abrupt change every single time. And if you do want to do things like fading without using a large amount of code, you can use tweening solutions, which are often used to tween between one position and another, and it can be done for audio, and DOTween is one of the most popular ones you'll find for absolutely free on the Unity Asset Store. And if you check their documentation, you will find a part about audio mixers or audio sources, and you can use the method doFade between the float and the duration, and it'll tween between two values. And you can even do it with the audio source's pitch as well, if you want to use that. And I do have a video showing you the basics of doing tweening and fading. This is with UI, but it's pretty much can be used throughout I've got something where you can create a playlist or something within Unity where you can play random track lists directly inside Unity, and this is built in and you don't need any other assets to do this. I didn't know it existed. It's just called an audio random container. You can let me know if this has been in Unity for a long time. So you can right click your project panel, create, choose audio, then choose audio random container. And we're going to just name this to our background tracks. Now you can see on here we can click on edit the audio random container. So once that pops out, you can see this little dialog box here. You can see that we've got the name, the background tracks, and you can press play if you've added any. We've got volume, pitch adjustments, we've got the audio clips we can add the trigger, whether you want to do this manually or automatic. You can do play mode, so you can just do it sequentially. You can shuffle, or you can choose random. You can make sure when it's on automatic trigger mode, you can do pulse or offset, and you can loop infinitely, loop based on the clips or the cycles that it has. So say you want to use this and start using it. If you've got a bunch of background clips, imagine it's Skyrim and you're walking around and you've got 10 different background audio and you just want it to randomly do this for the player. You can find any audio source within the game, and mine normally has my background audio. If you add this background tracks random container, that is something that adds as an audio reference. Now once that's been added, we can add bunches of audio clips, so you can add ones in there. I've got the different ones, I'll just randomly put 2 in there. You can specify the volume in decibels for each one, and as I said, you can put them sequentially, which is just they run one after another, or you can just shuffle randomly, so when they finish they'll end. And you can even have highlight tips to explain what each of these do. And like in this example, it will infinitely loop. As long as there's tracks in here, it will always loop between them. Clips will be that it will only play the loops of the clips for the amount that there's played, or cycles in terms of how, if there's 4, we'll do all 4 and then finish, or if you want to do the all 4 again, you can do that. But I suppose for this case, it'd be great to put it on infinite. And then once you start your game, it will cycle between those tracks nice and easily, and it's something directly built into Unity if you want to control it. I am going to show is all about audio mixes and being able to control groups of audio for the purposes of being able to make sure all sound effects can be minimized in sound and other things like that. In the video all about the basics of audio, I do have a bit explaining audio mixes in more detail, and I do have a video all about changing the volume in code the right way, because you need to adapt because it uses decibels rather than a generic whole number. So to create yourself an audio mixer, you can right click in your project panel, go create, choose audio and choose audio mixer. I'm going to name this my house audio mixer. And with that being said, you can see that we don't have many options on the side. If we go to window and we go to audio, we go to audio mixer. I'm going to dock this in my Unity editor so you can see. Now, you can see that we've got mixers, snapshots, groups, and views. Groups are the most common thing that you will use because you can see master is the thing that would turn down every single audio effect in the game, because that controls all the different groups. Now, if we press the little plus, you can see that we've created a group off this master. This could be music, as we'd see in many games. We can right-click master and add a new child group. This could be just regular sound effects, and you can have as many different groups as you want. So these can all be done independently of the master. So as you can see in many settings menus, you could turn down the music, but the master is still relevant, whereas if you pull down the master, these would both be affected. So to make these, or to use these within your different audio sources that you might have, you can go to something like the background audio and you can see the output is looking for a mixer group. You don't have to use mixer groups, but it's a good thing to use. If you press the little search and find, you can specify which of these objects it will use. So for my background audio, I want that just to be music, and then I'll be able to adjust it with this music slider, or the master in my case. And anything like footsteps, birdsong, kitchen, the birdsong, the ceiling fan, anything like that, we could always find something and class this as sound effects. So now you can hear that I'm by the window and you can hear the birds and you can hear the music. Now we need to make sure that we click edit and play mode so we can adjust these. But remember, it will remember them after you've exited the game. Now if we pull down the master, you can see that everything has been muted. Or we can put it back to normal. You can see if we pull down the music tab, we could still hear the bird song, just as we expected. And if we pull down the sound effects, we can just hear the music. So it's a nice way to control bunches of different audio exactly in it for something like a settings menu, because it can be really helpful to you. And do be sure, I've put the links down below to the video where you can look about editing this in code, because you have to create an exposed parameter and make sure you convert this to use decibels rather than a regular unit. I wanted to show off a few free and premium assets that will be really useful for you when it comes to audio. And the first one is something called volumetric audio. I will have a little showcase of showing you how to use this briefly. And volumetric audio allows you to emit sound from particular shapes. So see, you've got a corridor and you only want that sound to come through the actual corridor. Think of this river here. Then when you're walking through it, it plays the sound. If you're on the outside of that volumetric shape, you won't be able to hear the audio as long as you have the fading down to a good amount. Then you can exclude it from coming through walls and other places, and it's really, really useful. I've got one called Bro Audio here, which is an audio manager which is absolutely free, and this can control audio, track lists, fading, lots of different sound effects, randomizing different things, and it's a really cool, useful asset that you can check out too. I've got one here which is a paid audio manager, which has loads of ways to set volumes, fade in, fade out, really useful things within code, perfect for optimization and code, and control bunches of audio effects and outputs directly in here. And I've got one from Procedural Worlds actually that I've used before, and this is to create soundscapes. One example of this is you could create a forest soundscape and you can play back music and sounds like birds, frogs and branches for a particular type of day or weather, and it can change dynamically. You can have sounds coming from random places or stuff around the player, and you can even have something where wind will get louder and louder as you scale up a mountain. You can change music if you get attacked, and you can add loads of additional sequences to get more intense with the music and the sounds in any different situation that you might want to use. So first of all, I'm going to have a quick look at volumetric audio, and I've just got this as a sort of visual representation. On volumetric audio, you can see it inherits from any default collider in Unity. So this just inherited from a box collider, and I just added a material to it so you could see it. But if I disable it, you can see it's got a VA box component. I've got an audio source here, which would act normally if we didn't have the script called the VA, the volumetric audio source, and then we need to make sure that we have shapes where it's going to emit from, and this just emits from our shape here. It's not a classic audio source because we can't move this around. It's just something that we can use. We can still use volumes and spatial blend, which you make sure it's 3D, and you can set a fade amount and a fade distance, and only when we're either close, depending on your fade settings, or inside this volumetric audio box will it play the sound. And you can even have settings where if you have it that is set to hollow, it will only emit from the edges and doesn't emit when you're inside the actual trigger itself. So I'll give you a quick example. So as you can see here, we will get some audio as we get closer, and then only when we're inside this do we actually play the audio, and it doesn't change no matter where we actually go along this collider, and only when we exit it do we fade from that and have it from there. So it's a great way to have this just restricted to a particular area, and you can occlude stuff in between too. So these are just a few different examples of some of the assets you could use. So again, if you've got any suggestions on the great ways to improve audio, make it better, or any tips and tricks, do comment down below, because I'd love to hear them from you, because we can share those with everybody else and they can make the best games that they can. So I'll put the scripts that I've used here on my Patreon so you can get hold of them, so you can do the fading and other stuff like that. So I'll put all the links to Unity sales and all the best bundles for audio down below. And a big thank you to all my patrons. Special thank you to Peter Steiner, Verishutha, Jennifer and David for their amazing support. And thank you to everybody else who comes to watch the video. Don't forget to like, comment and subscribe. Cheers.